Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review, and I'm continuing the Planet of the Apes series. Today I'm going to review the second film in this series, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, my VHS. Now, this film was released 2 years after the original in 1970, and in the original film series, that's the longest between films, because after this, each film would be coming out one after another, at least for the first couple sequels. Then, of course, the second series didn't have a sequel, and of course, with the more recent series, they actually waited a couple years in between films. I think that's a smarter one than instead of just churning it out, because usually that's a bad move. But for this one, it's kind of the reverse in a way. They waited a while, at least and the film came out 2 years later, but it's still a downgrade. Now, I don't know if this is going to be my least favorite of the sequels, probably between this and double checking the title of the last one. Battle is probably going to be between this and Battle. I'll say right now what the major thing against this film is, and that is that it has a lower budget than the original. The original had like a $6.5 million budget, give or take. This film, I've heard different estimates. I've heard some say it had a $5 million, and then the lowest I've heard is a $2.5 million. I'd say it probably around $2.5 to $3 million, because you could definitely tell that the budget was downsized in this. And even though there's less usage, even though the usage of makeup in this film is maybe a little less than the first film, it is a downgrade on the most part. Because whereas in the first film you really did believe every person you were seeing is an ape, at times in this film you look at that and go, okay, that's definitely a mask. You can definitely tell that more with the orangutans than in the chimps than with the gorillas, but there were times where I'm like, yep, that's a gorilla mask. But not to say the film's bad, it's just that's one thing I noticed. The film is directed by Ted Post, who... The only other film that I recognize for sure on his filmography is a film he directed 3 years after this, Magnum Force, the Dirty Harry sequel, which I think it's funny that that sequel is a lot better than this sequel. That the first sequel he makes is not as good as the second one he makes. Another one I recognize on here, I think, is Stagecoach in '86, but that's a think. Now, of course, the genesis of this film came after the original film was released. It was a big hit, and as it's been throughout film history, studios are like, you know, the film is a hit. We gotta make another one. We gotta make another one. So a sequel was put into production. They first contacted Rod Sterling, who was one of the screenwriters for the first film, but his ideas did not interest the studio. It makes me wonder what his ideas would have been. Then they turned to the author of the original novel, Pierre Boulle, who wrote a draft for a sequel called Planet of the Men. Now, this one actually would have been very interesting to see. Probably would have cost as much as the first film or a little bit more. But the plot of that would have been Taylor would come back and lead an uprising of the enslaved men to take back control of the planet from the apes. So kind of like a messiah figure, you know, basically. That would have been very interesting to see, because it would have been Zaius' fears come to life. Of course, this would happen at the time that the general of the gorillas wants to fight humans. And of course, his script was rejected because it lacked the visual shock and the surprise of the original. Which I really wish I could go back in time and slap the 20th Century Fox head for that. It's like, lacks the shock and surprise of the original? You can't recreate the shock and surprise of the first film like that. You're going to just retread. And also, the reason that it works in the first film is because you don't expect it. There's a little bit of build-up to it. But until the end, you don't really suspect this is what's going to happen. It was then associate producer Mort Abrahams who wrote story elements, along with British writer Paul Den, who helped him with the script. At that time, called Planet of the Apes Revisited. Kind of a weird title. Now, one element brought up by them was a half-human, half-ape child. But despite going through some makeup tests, this was dropped due to the implication of bestiality. And this is not the first time that they dropped that from it. I mean, the last film in the original series was going to have that, which I think that would have made more sense to use it there. And from what I hear, they do kind of hint that something like that could possibly happen in Burton's film. But I don't really see the problem with it that much. For one, these are evolved apes, and also on the animal tree of life, these apes are our closest living relatives. Now, it would make more sense if it was a chip or a bonobo hybrid with a human, considering the DNA is more close than, let's say, a gorilla or an orangutan with a human. And I could actually envision the makeup effects for it being like what they used in the test footage. If you haven't seen the test footage that they shot before they made the first film, I recommend going to YouTube and looking it up. Then you'll see what I mean, because that looked like more like it'd be a human-ape hybrid than the makeup that's in the final film. But anyway, as I'm guessing a lot of studios usually do, they approached Charlton Heston, and he showed little interest in reprising his role, which is, I'm guessing, one of the reasons why Boole's original idea was axed as well. He eventually agreed to a small role, and he also donated all of his pay to charity. One of the concessions they gave was that they'd kill off his character, but of course, originally he wanted him to die in the beginning, which I think that would have been more of a dishonor to the character of Taylor than, killing him off in between films. He just disappears in the beginning and reappears at the end, which I think is a little bit more noble for him. And of course, in the wake, we get another main character named Brent, who is basically Taylor in everything but name, basically a poor man's Taylor. The actor who plays him does a good job, it's just he doesn't have the same charisma and film presence that Heston did. And a sad thing is that Roddy McDowall does not appear as Cornelius in this film because he had prior commitments, so another actor plays him. The actor does a good job, which I'm going to look up the actor's name right here. David Watson. He does a good job, but you still miss McDowall in it because McDowall has that unique voice behind the makeup. Orson Welles apparently was also offered a role in the film as General Ursus, or however you pronounce, but he turned it down because of all his screen time would have been in makeup. That just shows Welles' arrogance. I mean, you could say what you want. He's a fantastic filmmaker from what I hear. I haven't seen any of his films, so I can't really comment on it, but considering the first film was a success, why would you turn down a role in the sequel just because of makeup? I would. If I was offered a role in a sequel that, even though I'd be behind makeup a lot, I would jump at the chance. I would just use my voice a lot more. I'd physically go at it. Sorry. I'd use my physical body and all that, like in a normal acting thing, but I would try to enunciate a little better. Not over the top, but, use my voice in a way that's like, oh, okay, now I know who's behind that. If that makes any sense. Just think of like the way that the ape actors in this film have to do it, because they're behind the makeup. You could sort of tell who's there, but it's their voice that gives them away. Now, the stars of this film, we got James Franciscus, I believe it's pronounced. It's Franciscus, Franciscus, as Brent. And like I said, he does a good job. He just doesn't have the same presence as Heston. David Watson as Cornelius. Kim Hunter returns as Zira. Maurice Evans returns as Zaius. Linda Harrison returns as Nova. And in addition to that, we got Paul Richards as Mendez, Natalie Trudy, Jeff Corey, Victor Buono as Adiposo, who is credited as Fat Man, Don Pedro Colley as Ongaro, which I'm not going to say what he's credited as, just in case it would offend anyone. No, it's not the N-word, but it is an N-word. James Gregory as General Ursus. I'll have trouble with this. I'm always going to have trouble with this name. Ursus, the Guerrilla General, which he does a very great job. Heston, of course, in the small role as Taylor. Todd Andrews as Skipper. And at the end, we got Paul Frees as the narrator. Now, the plot begins a little bit after the event of the first film. Taylor vanishes, so Nova is alone in the Forbidden Zone with the horse. And of course, she walks off with the horse, and eventually she comes across Brent, who is a surviving astronaut in a ship similar to Taylor's that apparently was sent after them for some reason. Never fully explains why they were sent after him, but they too have arrived there. Brent asks Nova to take him to Taylor because he notices she's wearing dog tags that have his name on it. This is a retcon but it's one of those ones that after watching the first film, you're like, what? How does this make sense? Because nowhere in the first film did Taylor have dog tags. That would have been a hint to the gorillas and the orangutans and even the chimps that there was something weird about him. And it also would have led credence to his claim to be from outer space, though of course Zayas probably would have said, "Oh, it's a fort. This is from the military. Oh, pompous." No, but anyway, Nova eventually leads Brent back to Ape City, where he sees the whole gorilla speech. The only good human is a dead human. Which this, in a later scene, continue to play up a little bit of the allegory that the original film had, where the later with the mutated humans, it's about the dangers of religion, or in this case, extreme religion. This one still continues the prejudice, the whole caste segregation thing in it, which I do like that they still keep that there a little bit, because that's one of the strengths of the original film, is that you could see that in there. And I do like that they actually brought in religion with it. Now, one thing involving the character Nova they brought into this film never fails, doing a review when the phone has to ring. I bet that's Zayas trying to sue me from Ape City. Anyway, is that they actually brought in the fact that in the novel, Taylor's counterpart tried to teach Nova to speak. Doesn't succeed until the end, and in the novel it's because she's pregnant, and for some reason teaching her kid has an effect on her. It's basically just the character speculating that that's the reason it's working with her, and I guess it would. But I do like that they brought that in. And now eventually Brett and Nova have to get out of Ape City after meeting Cornelius and Zira. And they eventually find themselves in the ruins of ancient New York. And they meet mutated humans who have telekinetic powers. And those humans eventually get into a mini war with the apes that destroys the planet. I know with the first one I'm giving it away, but I have to bring that in there because it connects with the whole thing with the apes and the humans. And like with the first film, it shows the barbaric side of humans through this story. In this one, it's that, to steal a line from Terminator 2, it's in your nature to destroy yourselves. Which that's probably the bad thing about humans, and you can actually see this in real life with apes like chimps, that they'll go to war. It makes you wonder, what would happen if they had higher technology like us? Would they destroy the planet? Or would they use it better? So it brings questions up like that. And it's just sad to think that war and all that is kind of in human nature, though. Maybe probably the behavior probably more is, but we can control, at least try to control it. You know, just a lot of questions you could think of, stuff like that. I'm just saying stuff like that off the top of my head, but I think if you watch the film, you could probably understand what point I'm trying to make with this. And of course, it ends on a negative note. Which, with how the last act is going, this film has to end on a negative note. I'm not going to spoil it for those of you who haven't seen it, unless I have what I've already said has spoiled it. But when you watch it, you're like, okay, the first film ends kind of in a neutral way. It's upbeat, yet downbeat at the same time. It's downbeat because we find out what happened to humanity, but it's upbeat because Taylor and Nova survived and they could possibly do something in the future. With this one, it's like, okay, that's kind of sad. And I guess that combined with the lower production value of the sequel, I guess that's part of the reason why I never really watched this film as much as I did the original. Not to say it's a bad sequel, it's definitely a step down. It's like when you compare the first 3 Frankenstein films to the films that followed, you can see the production value slowly went down. It's like that, but right out of the gate. I'll say probably the best thing about it is some of the matte work, a little bit of the music, and of course the acting from our main actors, and of course the makeup on them is fantastic still. It's just in the background you could tell that they skimped out on the budget. And it also doesn't seem to have the same scope that the first film did, but I'm guessing that also could be the slashing of the budget, and also that apparently they went with a cheaper director, because according to IMDb, one of the reasons they picked Post was because he was used to working with smaller budgets and getting stuff done in the manner that was expected of him. Which I guess that makes sense, but it kind of shows in the final film a little bit. Now, with that, the first film, the original film, didn't really need a sequel. I guess I probably should have said that at the beginning, but this is one that's enjoyable, but not one I'd watch all the time. I think I probably got that through already. Not really much else I could say about it. I mean, acting good, the score not as good as the first film, but still pretty good. It's done by Leonard Rosenman. He does a good job. Cinematography is okay for the budget. Post does a good job working with what he was given by the studio. I do like a lot of the stuff it continues on from the first film, like I've already mentioned. The whole religious thing with the mutants, and of course the whole thing with the gorillas, though. That's actually kind of one of my minor problems with the film, just like with the first film, was that the gorillas are portrayed as brutish, when anyone who knows gorillas in real life knows that they are benevolent. Apparently chimps are more violent in real life than gorillas are, so I think that's a little funny that chimps are singled out to be the intelligent ones along with the orangutans, but the orangutans being more pompous and not wanting change, while the chimps are a little bit more curious and intellectual. I think that's probably going with, I think, like I said in the previous review, I think they did that because of the fact that chimps are more closely related to us than orangutans and gorillas. And also gorillas in real life are bigger, so maybe that's why they're also going with the old stereotype. But one thing I forgot to mention is that in the first film, at least you had one gorilla who didn't seem to be so brutish in the character of Julius, even though he didn't seem to like the fact that Taylor could speak. In this film, you can't really see any gorilla you like, at least a little bit, for a while. Because all the gorillas basically are yes men for Ulysses. The only good human is a dead human. That's basically all the gorillas in this film. The chimps, you like Cornelius and Zira still, and of course there's a bunch of younger chimps who I'm guessing are compatriots of Zira's nephew, that basically kind of remind me a little bit of the protesting in the Vietnam era. Maybe that's what that was referencing. And of course, there's one shot that I thought was very great where the military horses marching over their protest signs. I'm like, yeah, that kind of sums up a little bit of protests being destroyed for no valid reason. So a little bit of that, see into that what you will. Zaya seems a little different in this film. He does seem a little bit more flip-floppy than he was in the first film. I mean, at times it seems like he doesn't like what the gorillas are doing, but by the end he's fully with them and doesn't even want to help Taylor when Taylor begs him for help. When, with what he's seen already, that not doing anything will cause damage, but I guess his hate of humans blinds his logic, which is kind of funny considering in the first film he says of man that his wisdom must go hand in hand with his idiocy. Well, in this film that goes with Zaya, so maybe that's showing a little bit of his maybe that's supposed to be part of his character flaw in this film. That's just my guess. But anyway, what would I rate this film? I would have to rate Beneath the Planet of the Apes a 3.5 out of 5. Good sequel, but not the best sequel we could have got. I mean, if they had more money, we could have got that Planet of the Men, but then we probably wouldn't have got more sequels after that. So I guess there's kind of a flip there, but it still makes me wonder how that film would have turned out.